Well, hello there, and welcome to the Quadruple D. And in this episode, I'll be talking about how Abdul El-Sayed defeated Haley Stevens. And yes, I know there are people out there who want to be optimistic and all that kind of stuff, and I understand. But I've got to insert a little bit of doom and gloom back into your little lives and your little minds because it's not going to be the panacea that some people want it to be. I just have to bring you back to reality because electoral politics continues to function as a mechanism for managing state power rather than actually liberating communities all that much. And recent primary results sort of highlight the sharp divisions within the political elite, but they also reveal that quite a lot of work would still need to be done in order to really deliver the kinds of wins that we really need in order to bring the world into a saner place. So, in Missouri's St. Louis based congressional primary, Representative Wesley Bell prevailed in a rematch against former Representative Cory Bush. So, that was a bit disappointing, right? That's a little bit of a cause for alarm for people who thought that Cory Bush might have a chance and, we'd have a little bit more of a progressive outlook in Missouri. And of course, what everybody's talking about the most is in Michigan, where Representative John James secured the Republican nomination for governor with Donald Trump's endorsement and will compete against Democratic Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson. Oh, wait, that's not what everybody's talking about the most. Actually, the most prominent battle occurred in Michigan's Democratic U.S. Senate primary, where former public health official Abdul El-Sayed defeated four-term Representative Haley Stevens in a high-stakes clash between the party's progressive wing and the so-called establishment center. El-Sayed, endorsed by Senator Bernie Sanders and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, he campaigned on Medicare for all, systemic campaign finance reform, and a halt to U.S. military aid to Israel. So those are all progressive features. So that's why, we're wanting to celebrate him winning. But, again, I got to sprinkle in that little dash of pessimism here. Uh, it's interesting because he actually just barely won. I mean, let's keep that in mind. Though State Senator Mallory McMorrow officially withdrew from the race in July, her name actually remained on the ballot and it drew votes. It seems that had McMorrow's voters consolidated behind Stevens, Stevens might have actually edged out a victory. In fact, it definitely looks that way mathematically. And I have to, I've got to give an ultra rare bit of credit to Haley Stevens too, because at the very least, she did say she will endorse Abdul El-Sayed if he wins, and it definitely appears that he did win. So credit where it's due. Haley Stevens, she didn't have to say that she would endorse him. So it's a bit of a rare thing that I have to say, but good job, Haley Stevens, for at least doing the bare minimum when it comes to that. And well, here's a little bit of a twist here. Here's a reason for me to actually engage in some slight optimism when it comes to the area that I live in. I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That a big upper half of the state that nobody talks about. No, I'm not talking about the northern part of the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. I'm talking about that part above the Mackinac Bridge, you know, that has a lot of people that kind of get ignored. But the county returns in the UP revealed some surprising regional dynamics, including progressive strength across Michigan's Upper Peninsula, because the Democrats here overwhelmingly seemed to favor Abdul El-Sayed. In fact, even in places where Haley Stevens won, like Baraga County, if you look there, as a specific example, Stevens won by a paper thin margin of just 14 votes, and in other places where Stevens pulled ahead, it also wasn't by that many votes. So, uh, oddly enough, the UP Democratic voters seem more progressive than the Michigan Detroit voters, oddly enough. I kind of can't get over that. I was expecting, the Uper vote for the Democrats to be actually less progressive than the people downstate, but it apparently wasn't the case. So I guess I can say good job, Upers. You kind of did the right thing when it comes to voting. El-Sayed now advances to face Republican Mike Rogers in November for a seat that could decide control of the U.S. Senate. So I guess that's going to be some bit of excitement for people. I know people want to celebrate right now, but obviously it's not quite over yet. So I've got to get into my more anarchic analysis and look at some factual context here. So, from a progressive perspective, I still have to say that elections serve primarily to legitimize these hierarchical state authorities and preserve capital relations, regardless of whether these ostensibly progressive or centrist factions prevail. I mean, the general structure is still going to be there, and money is still dominating our political system. And this still appears true if you consider the capital and super PAC dominance of this election. The primary actually became the most expensive Senate primary in U.S. history, from what I understand, with over $60 million in outside spending. The APAC affiliated United Democracy Project, which is misleadingly titled, well, that alone poured over $30 million to back Haley Stevens. And I have to stress that representative democracy under capitalism is inherently bound to these moneyed interests and seemingly to militarism as well. It looks like true systemic reform within these state structures is damn near impossible. So while a progressive might champion state administered solutions like Medicare for all, it's still true that relying on state legislation leaves health and livelihoods subject to central government control and the looming influence of corporate power, which is always risky. You've still got the danger that these moneyed interests they'll win, and people will not get the kind of institutions that they should have in society. Things will be more about profit and exploiting people for money rather than actually serving the public interest and the general good and the general welfare of humanity. And you've got some anti militarism, that was talked about by El-Sayed, which is great. But still, we're going to have imperial governance dominating the U.S. system. El-Sayed's condemnation of foreign military aid, it shows that genuine public opposition to state violence is a thing and can even find its way into the political rhetoric of our politicians. However, the nation state itself is still fundamentally an engine of coercion, and when it comes to the US, at least, imperialism. So, swapping individual representatives within the imperial legislature is unlikely to dismantle the military industrial complex or the state's monopoly on violence. And, any real change is going to have to be implemented from below rather than from above. We have to still change the culture in the United States. And it's not going to be it's any change, any meaningful change is not going to be a gift from above. We still have to do a lot of work as individuals and as organizations, as uh, institutions, what have you. However you want to frame it, there's still a lot of work ahead. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom. There are glimmers of hope here and there, but we can't just rest and think all the work is over, and we can just uh, totally ignore everything that happens from here on out. That's not what is going to be necessary. So anyway, I've got more of these quadruple D episodes on the way. I'm going to be talking about a guy named David Allen Trott, who was a person who served where Haley Stevens is from. So we're going to look at how he was a peripheral poop head. He's going to be my peripheral poop head of the week. I'm planning to record that episode tomorrow. And then I'm going to look at one of the big John McCain scandals, the Keating 5 scandal, which I don't think I've talked about before. And I did a little bit of a reminder, uh, like some exploration into that scandal, just to remind myself what it was all about. And sure enough, it's just some corrupt crap that John McCain was doing, and it's another example of how corrupt our system is. So I'll be recording that episode probably on Friday. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm not saying you can't celebrate, the win against Haley Stevens. By all means, feel free to do that, but just understand that the struggle is not over.